So, good afternoon to another EFCA Patient Talks. We welcome everybody who's watching from all around the world. So, as we continue in this global pandemic, EFCA decided to look at COVID-19 and the vaccination process. And I think this is something that is a hot topic on everybody's mouth at the moment and all around the world. So, we are delighted to be joined by three speakers today. So we have Professor Axel Dignas, who joins us from Frankfurt, who's the president of the United European Gastroenterology. And he will discuss with us the potential concerns and implications around the COVID-19 vaccination in regard to inflammatory bowel disease. We then are joined by Dr. András Schüler, who's joining us from Budapest, who is the president-elect at the European Association of Hospital Pharmacists. And he will talk to us about the COVID-19 vaccination programme and the challenges that the implementation and administration will need to follow when more vaccines become available. And we're very, very aware that the vaccination process in each country at the moment is very different. And he will talk us through the challenges of that. We're then joined by our own Maria Stella Staroshis, who's in Belgium at the moment, and she is our EFCA European Project Officer. And she will look at some of the outcomes of the vaccination survey that EFCA did in relation to the protocols around Europe. So we hope you will enjoy the next hour with us. If you have any questions, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end of the session and the speakers will be with us. So please pop your questions into the comments if you have any. Okay, thank you. We'll first up have Professor Axel Dignas, and I'm sure many of you probably have met Professor Dignas before, and he is with United European Gastroenterology, and we will discuss about the concerns and implications around the COVID-19 vaccination and for the IBD community as a whole. So, good afternoon. Always when doing a live show, you never know what's going to happen. So we hopefully will see Professor Dignas. He is there, I assure you, because I was talking to him earlier on. So he will join us now in a second. This is, I suppose, besides COVID-19 vaccinations and, there he is. Welcome, Professor Dignas. Professor Dignas, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I think that the signal from Ireland to Germany is awful. Professor Dignas, can you hear me? So we've lost him. But hopefully he will join us soon. This was all working earlier on, not a bother. The great technology era that we're in. It's always a challenge, and I'm sure many of you at home have had this with webinars. There's a lot of... So we're still just trying to connect to Frankfurt. There must be something in the weather that's coming between Germany and Ireland. So maybe we will see if Dr. Schüler is available and give Professor Dignas time to get him involved. Now, Professor Schüler, thank you so much for jumping around there for us.
I'm here, yeah.
So no problem. You're joining us from Budapest, and you're going to look at, I suppose, the challenges for the vaccination program and their implementation for around Europe at the moment.
Okay.
Okay, we'll talk to you later. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. May I have the slides, please? Great. So, first of all, thank you, Chiara, and thank you for the whole EFCA community for inviting me and the European Association of Hospital Pharmacists to one of this very spectacular and very useful events of the EFCA patient talks. And just like you have heard in the brief introduction, I will be talking about some challenges and some uncertainties around the vaccination programs and also vaccination in general related to inflammatory bowel diseases from the hospital pharmacist point of view. Just like you have heard in the introduction, I am a hospital pharmacist working as a hospital pharmacist in Budapest, Hungary, and I also am the upcoming president for the European Association of Hospital Pharmacists. If I may have the next slide, you will all see that EAHP is an umbrella organization, very much like EFCA, so it's an association of associations, so to say, representing and developing hospital pharmacy profession and the hospital pharmacist community throughout the greater European area, and where our engagement lies is first and foremost education throughout our member countries, but also we are deeply involved in several professional and scientific projects around developing hospital pharmacy and our clinical pharmacy endeavors, and developing the roles of hospital pharmacists throughout our member countries. And last but not least, EAHP is also deeply involved with several European bodies, European institutions, including the Commission and the Parliament and Directorate Generals for Commission, where our policy endeavors lie. And we really are trying hard and very hard to facilitate the recognition of our profession and the changing roles of our profession on the European level. Next slide, please. And I'm sure most of you have this very similar experiences from this past year of 2020, which was challenging, to say the least. And I would even say that it was a kind of a roller coaster ride for all of us, and not from the nice kind of roller coaster rides. Back in last February, last March, we began to see the first cases of the coronavirus pandemic, which later turned out to be a very unfortunate and very serious pandemic, hitting all of the world very hard. And during the first couple of weeks, or even I would say months, we were suffering from a lack of proper information, both in terms of therapeutic protocols, both in terms of how to deal with this sort of pandemic on the healthcare, on the health system level. We were facing multiple challenges in readiness and capacities throughout the world, and especially in the European Union. And from the pharmacy perspective, we were seeing some very alarming trends of our very sought after and very diligently used evidence-based medicine approach was hurt quite a bit. And we were seeing a great deal of misinformation, a great deal of non-substantiated claims throughout the social media and throughout patient talks. And it was really a challenging time even for us and for medical doctors to kind of take part in setting those lines straight and looking at evidence-based data for therapy and approaching the COVID pandemic. As a secondary result, we kind of ended up in several shortages in medications throughout the EU. First and foremost in the area of intensive care medications, antibiotics, and also some antiviral medications. From EAHP's point of view, we were trying really hard to help out our members and all the pharmacists and all the medical doctors who were amongst our reach. We have come up with a very deep resource center with curated evidence-based information, filterable to countries and origin of those documents or those legislative documents. We have introduced the COVID-19 drug calculation tool, helping our fellow members to kind of estimate what kind of pressure and what kind of stockpile would they need for preparing for a certain number of patients or a certain number of cases. And also, we try to create a sort of a community around how hospital pharmacists were dealing with the first wave of the pandemic with our best practice video initiative. And meanwhile, we also were in close contact with all the European bodies, including the European Medicines Agency. And by the time we thought we would be able to lay back and just see how our results were evolving, we were hit by the second wave or the second phase of the pandemic sometime during this fall. We hoped for a better preparedness for the second wave, and from certain aspects, we surely were better prepared. But we were seeing new challenges. We were seeing new challenges of extremely large number of new cases day by day. We were seeing new challenges for our health systems, having to withstand serious pressure from this huge number of patients we were seeing. But also, as we saw the first reports from vaccines coming in, we had to prepare the whole system to be able to accept that amount of medications, that amount of vaccines, and we were there to help out with governments and national competent authorities to formulate their vaccination plans. And these vaccination plans involved two major issues or two major set of difficulties from the hospital pharmacist's point of view. Next slide, please. The first set of those challenges were related to logistics, and for some extent there still are. We are seeing that in the broader EU region, three kinds of vaccines are already authorized. The well-known BioNTech/Pfizer medication, the Comirnaty vaccine, the Moderna RNA vaccine, and the Oxford/AstraZeneca vaccine. They are all authorized by this day, but we all see that several are on the way, from the Sputnik V vaccine to the Sinopharm, Covishield, and all the rest of these vaccinations that are in the pipeline. This sheer variety and the very different nature of these vaccinations are already posing a threat to our fellow colleagues as hospital pharmacists throughout the EU. We are still not seeing a fully addressed nature from the point of view of logistics in terms of how records are kept to ensure that everyone is getting their vaccinations in the right time, in the right dose, at the specific timeline required by that specific vaccine the patient were getting. And also, and this is perhaps the second most challenging issue, is the pharmacovigilance activities, because we really have to be vigilant. We really have to pay close attention to the side effects and the adverse events related to vaccinations, and we are still quite a bit in the dark, especially how the first and the second dose of certain vaccines are affecting people differently. What side effects or adverse reactions are they going to endure, and what is the case of comorbidities, but more on that later. We are also seeing a very alarming rate of vaccine hesitancy throughout our countries, and unfortunately to say that social media is not doing that great in that regard, and a huge set of false informations or misinformations are spread through these channels of social media. And I'm sure we as healthcare professionals, along with all our colleagues and along all the patient organizations within our reach, have a huge oath to make, and we have a huge role to play to inform the society, inform the patients, inform the population in a very unbiased and very truthful manner and a very evidence-based manner on why and how to get those vaccines. And we are currently not quite sure how vaccination programs will going to affect other markets related to vaccinations, but we are kind of worried that we might see some shortages in terms of syringes or needles as well. EAHP has already issued an opinion paper outlining these challenges and our advice on what needs to be done and how to tackle with these problems in close contact with national competent authorities. Next slide, please. And the second part, where hospital pharmacists are really facing challenges, is the clinical pharmacy side. So when our fellow hospital pharmacist colleagues are working in the front line together with medical doctors, nurses, and all other healthcare professionals by the bedside, and we have already had a very important task in terms of medication reconciliation and medication review on hospital wards, so that we could explore the comorbidities of our patients, we could explore their medication histories, and through this we could have identified all the potentially dodgy or potentially dangerous combinations of medications or potentially inappropriate medications, to say the least. And when we are talking about vaccinations, a certain set of the population is usually coming up on the radars of clinical pharmacists. And incidentally, amongst those are the people who are suffering from inflammatory bowel diseases. So we have identified those high-risk populations for autoimmune diseases, immunocompromised patients, or our patients facing serious or severe comorbidities, or either in terms of cardiovascular, hematologic, or even malignant diseases. And also, we are quite well aware that frailty in general and the elderly population is already at higher risk from the COVID infection itself. And also, we have to be quite vigilant when we are administering vaccination to these population. What we know so far, and this is very important to stress out, and I'm sure that Professor Aldingnes will talk at length about these topics, but from the clinical pharmacy point of view, we are seeing evidence popping up day by day that the risks of vaccination programs, COVID vaccination programs for autoimmune diseases and patients suffering from these diseases is anticipated to be low. And probably worst case scenario for immunocompromised patients, those who are taking biologics are included in this group. The main concern, or the worst case scenario, I would say, is that a suboptimal vaccine response, and we are less afraid of serious adverse events. What we see from the current evidence is that we only really have to be very careful when dealing with live vaccines for these patient populations. But so far, what we know and what vaccines are already authorized and what vaccines are in the pipelines, none of those get into the group of live vaccines. Even the adenovirus vector vaccines are of the non-replicating type, so they are not live viruses, so to say. So what clinical pharmacists can do is first and foremost be there by the patient when they are admitted to the hospitals to compile a list of reconciled medications and review those therapies, and be also there at vaccination points when patients' medical histories and medication histories are taken, so that they could help identify those red flags or alerting circumstances that might need attention from our clinical pharmacist point of view. But for now, evidence says that autoimmune diseases and IBD sufferers are not at heightened risks from vaccinations, and the potential gains from being immune to COVID far outweigh the minor risks associated to vaccination programs. And just like I mentioned before, we also have a task, and probably I would even say it's a mission, to educate our patients, educate the population itself, even at vaccination points. And it is our goal and our aim to provide unbiased and evidence-based information to our patients. So that would be it from my side. I am very much curious of your questions, and after Dr. Dignas's presentation, I will be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schule. I have a lot of questions, but I promise I'm not going to jump in with them now. I'm going to wait patiently to ask them. And I think a lot of people will have questions because there's some elements there that we possibly we don't think about as patients, and possibly some of the challenges that we don't even consider. And especially when you're rolling out a vaccination program around so many countries. So thank you so much, and we do know you're going to stay with us. We are going to change the program slightly. Professor Dignas is still having connection issues, so we are going to move to Maria Stella de Roches, who's joining us from Belgium, and she's the EFCA policy officer, and she has recently completed a short survey in relation to the protocols around our member countries. So again, I'm sure it'll bring up a lot of questions, Maria Stella, that you'll be able to answer afterwards. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kira. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. I'm going to share my presentation. Just tell me if you can hear me, and quickly, I'm going to share it. Okay, can you see it? Okay, I hope you can see my presentation. So good afternoon, everyone, again. My name is Maria Stella de Roches, and I'm European Project Officer at EFCA. Today, I'm going to share with you some results from a survey that we launched to our EFCA members. And the survey was about COVID-19 vaccination protocols. And the survey, we collected the data starting from last 18 January to 2021. So taking account, please remind that taking account that these results that I will be sharing with you today reflect that period of the time. So we learned that things with COVID-19 pandemic usually change rapidly, and so maybe what I say today maybe already changed over the days. So 21 EFCA members responded to our session, to our survey. So I'm going to share with you the data. So among the 21 EFCA members who responded to the survey, 15 come from European Union, and the other 6 come from the rest of the world. So I'm going to share again the map. And first of all, apologies for putting here New Zealand. I know that is in the opposite side of the world, but to be able to have the full picture in a slide, I wanted to give you a full picture of the situation at the moment. So those are all the countries who reacted to our survey. There's also Cyprus and Israel that are a bit hidden in the map, but they reacted positively to it. And then highlighted in green what the countries that at the moment there are at least one COVID-19 vaccine, and so at least one COVID-19 vaccine is available. And there are also, always highlighted in green, other countries in which at the end of January, of course, more than one COVID-19 vaccine was available already. And the only exception is New Zealand, because there's no COVID-19 vaccine available yet, and there will be in March 2021. But what we can say that all over the world, and from the response that we received, the vaccine will be free of charge for the patients, for the population, for the patients, and for the IBD patients as well. Of course, this is a positive news. Then moving a bit down with the slides, what we asked to our EFCA members was who really is in charge of administrating the COVID-19 vaccine, who is the healthcare professional who is in charge of doing it, and plus where people should go to be vaccinated, what people should go to receive the vaccine shot. So from the first graph, we can see that respondents provided us with more than one answer. This means that we didn't force our respondent to give us just one answer, because what we see across the different countries is that more than one healthcare professional is in charge of administrating the COVID vaccine, of course. So it can happen that within the same country, more than one of the healthcare workers that I show here are in charge of doing it. And in fact, the 55% of our 22 EFCA respondents all over the world declare that healthcare professional in general will be in charge of administrating it. And this means that it's still unclear who exactly is going to do it. So they just gave us a general answer. Then this percentage is followed by general practitioner, family doctor. Then we have nurses, of course, and then hospital physicians who work in the hospital, of course. And then when it comes to asking them where exactly and in which spot people should go to receive the vaccine shot, the majority say that there will be some local health unit, some different local health unit than those ones I put in the same graph. So some different local unit than pharmacy, hospital, vaccine center, and general practitioner cabinet. And this means that across the countries that where we launched the survey, I received some response like healthcare providers, like public health center, units, clinics, and so we decided to summarize them under local health unit. Then we have vaccine center, and for vaccine center, we mean in some countries, there will be used the same vaccine center we are being using today to get other types of vaccine. But there are some countries in which there will be put in place the new vaccine center. There will be established new vaccine center in which people can go to only to get the COVID-19 vaccine. So there will be created ad hoc for the COVID-19 vaccine. This is, of course, to be able to massively vaccine the population, of course. Then hospital will follow again, of course, then the GP cabinet, the GP studio, and also local pharmacy will be in charge of administrating the COVID-19 vaccine. So going in some countries, it's possible to go in some local pharmacy to be able to get the vaccine shot. Okay, but moving forward and moving finally to the IBD and risk groups, this is what we really were interested in. Our first question was, is IBD as disease is included in the risk group in the different countries? So we really wanted to know, asking you if IBD is recognized to be a disease that put at an higher risk the patient of contracting COVID-19. And the 30%, as you can see here, said no. So IBD is not including to be a risk disease in some countries. Then we received a positive reaction from the rest of the countries. So it's this 65%, but it's split in two different categories. So the 25% gave us a full yes. So they say that IBD is totally included in the risk group in some countries. So it means that all of types of IBD patients are treated like at risk, are exposing to an higher risk of contracting COVID-19. And the other 40%, that is the majority, say that IBD is included in the risk group, but only patients who are on immunosuppressive drugs, so that this automatically excludes the rest of the IBD patients. And then, of course, another important question followed this one, and it was if IBD patients are included in the priority plan of COVID-19 vaccine, because what we see that as soon as the COVID-19 vaccine is releasing in the different countries, each country is organizing itself with the establishment of a priority plan for some categories, of course. Everybody of you knows that, I'm pretty sure. And so our question was, is IBD is included in one of these category in the priority plan? And again, the same 30% who reacted negatively to the previous question, unfortunately, they gave us the same response, a negative response. So IBD patients are not included in the priority plan. And this means that they will be vaccinated together with the rest of the population. And but of course, we all hope that this is going to change over the weeks. Then we have the same 65% who reacted again positively, but it's divided and split in other different groups, and I will share with you the results. So the 35% say that IBD is listed together with other type of disease. This means that there's not specifically IBD as a disease, so included in the priority plan, but it is included with other disease. And I can make you some example. For example, in some countries, it was included with, I don't know, patients with background disease, so IBD, patients with background disease, patients with chronic and serious disease, patients with underlying conditions. So in this category, also IBD patients completely fall in this. So we have another 30% that is split in other three groups, and the first 10% say that IBD patients are included in the priority plan, but only again the patients on immunosuppressive drugs. Then we have another 10% who say that both of the kind of IBD patients will be included, so patients on immunosuppressive drugs and the patients who are not taking this kind of treatment, but they are categorized into different category, let's say. So there will be they will take first, then the rest of the population, the vaccine, of course, but probably we assume that those ones on immunosuppressive drugs will have the priority than the rest of IBD patients. But at least it's a good news because both of them should have the priority. And finally, we have another 10%, which says that only patients on immunosuppressive drugs are in the priority group, but this means that the rest of IBD patients are not automatically excluded from the category, but they can always ask the doctor, the treating doctor, if they can be part of this priority plan. Because in some countries we saw that things change, are personal based. So it's a really a personal based decision that only the doctor, of course, can take. And to conclude, of course, we hope that in the future, as things are rapidly changing, that this 30% that we see today in red will decrease. And then, of course, this situation reflect, as I told you in the beginning, the situation as at the end of January 2021. So if you want more detailed information, or if you want more updated, the most updated information, please always ask your treating doctor, of course, and also please ask your National EFCA Association. They are doing their best together with the institution and the government to be able for the IBD patient to get the priority on the vaccination, the COVID-19 vaccination. So we are always there for you, of course. I think I have done, and so thank you very much for your attention, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Maria Stella. And I should just say that all the presentations are on the EFCA website as well, if anybody wants to have a further look at them. I do believe we do now have Professor Dignes joining us. So hopefully he'll be okay from Germany. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I feel like I'm semi-hosting the Eurovision here, and I was a bit concerned I was going to lose you again. So as I was earlier, Professor Dignes will be discussing the concerns and implications around the COVID-19 vaccination for the IBD community. Again, if anybody has any questions, just pop them into the comments either on YouTube or Facebook, and we shall go through them at the Q&A session. Okay, Professor Dignes, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm very sorry that there was a problem with the technique. So if we can see the slides, I will start, and I hope that we will not have too many overlaps because I missed the complete talk of Andres. But I think we will be able to manage, and probably there will be a lot of questions left over at the end. So when we can move to the next slide, please. These are probably some of the most important questions you ask yourself or have been asked by your family members. Should IBD patients get vaccinated against COVID-19? Should IBD patients be prioritized? And you got the results of the EFCA questionnaire. Do the IBD-specific immunosuppressants and other medications interfere with the vaccine's effectiveness? Something that has to be recognized. And should IBD patients get the vaccine at a specific interval from their infusion or injection or other medications? So if we look the next slide, I would first like to really point out that the whole SARS-CoV-2 vaccination story is a great story of success. A lot of people complain that everything takes too long, that there is no vaccine available. But if you look at other diseases in the past, so the MERS infection similar to SARS-CoV or SARS-CoV-1 in the past, 6 years ago, still no vaccine for SARS-CoV-1. 17 years ago, still no vaccine. If you look at Ebola, more than 15 years around now, no vaccine. And if you look at polio, something which we have cured and know how to deal with, it took 60 years to get a vaccine. And if you look at HIV, for instance, still no vaccine available. And for SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19, we have a vaccine available in less than 10 months or let's say 12 months from the first diseases that appeared. So this is a real story of success. When we move to the next one, probably you heard a little bit in the previous talks, and it's still an ongoing story of success. There are more than 175 trials in preclinical development with different vaccines. At the moment, there are 63 vaccines in clinical development. So there will be much, much more to come in the near future. And on the next slide, I will show you that there are probably different pathways how to do it. One of the two currently initially available vaccines were so-called mRNA vaccines. So this is something which was really new, taking over from the cancer technology and putting the mRNA into the patient. A viral protein, the spike protein, is built, and this causes the formation of antibodies. In number 3, the viral vector using the RNA or the DNA of the SARS-CoV-2 gene to produce this spike protein is used, and this is the AstraZeneca vaccine, for instance, or the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik 5. So again, the viral protein is produced in the cells and antibodies are built. The typical vaccination strategy, which we use, for instance, for tetanus, for polio, for hepatitis A, B, and so on, is a different strategy. In this step, we use proteins, and we build these proteins with modern molecular genetic techniques, and then we inject the proteins into the patients directly to make this. This is much more complicated, it takes much more time, but at the moment there are also ongoing studies with this strategy. So you will get vaccinations for all these three different ideas. The next slide. I will just highlighting it. So on the left panel, you see the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and the virus, the red thing is the membrane, and on the membrane are the so-called spike proteins. These are used to connect with the cells that are going to be infected, and these are the typical antigens. And these antigens are produced by genetic information, DNA, RNA, which is in the virus. And so for these vaccination techniques, the viral RNA is used to produce this spike protein, different techniques. One I mentioned is the adenovirus system. So this is a viral vector, and this is used to get the RNA into the cells of the people who needs to be vaccinated, and then the cells of this individual are used to produce the protein. The other thing is the mRNA vaccine, which is on the right panel. So this is the Moderna and BioNTech system, where you use directly mRNA and put it in a lipid shell and inject this into the patient, and this can get into the cell again, and the cells are used to produce these proteins. On the next slide, I have a little bit similar cartoon of the mRNA vaccine. So this is the Moderna vaccine, and I got this information from the Moderna homepage. And you see that on the left panel, the vaccine is injected and is taken up. The mRNA can go into the cells, and the cells can be used to produce the protein, and the protein is then circulated, and the circulated protein stimulates the immune system, and the immune system forms antibodies, which will also be formed in patients who will get a real COVID vaccination. But this is of no risk for the patient, because both the virus or the RNA can only build these inactive and not infectious spike protein, and it's only in a limited area. The cells stop to build this very briefly, so there is no risk for the patient whatsoever, and the same with the virus, because this virus is not causing any diseases and not infecting the patient in a systemic way. It's just in a local way. So the next one. There is probably one other type of immunization. This is not what most of you think at the moment about immunizing the patient or immunization. We have what I was talking about in the previous minutes was active immunization. We also have something which is called passive immunization. So this is something which would work immediately. And for doing this, you just put the antibodies into a patient. And these antibodies can be either prepared or created from patients with COVID disease who already recovered when taking their plasma. So taking their blood and isolating out of their plasma, their blood, these antibodies. Or it can be used with recombinant monoclonal antibodies. So techniques we use, for instance, for preparing our biologics, for preparing infliximab, vedolizumab, ustekinumab. So we can produce these monoclonal antibodies that are antibodies against SARS-CoV-2, and they will neutralize the activity of SARS-CoV-2. And I put here one of these antibodies, the bamlanivimab. This is the one which is currently available in Europe, or it's not widely available. It's emergency license in the United States, and in some countries in Europe it will be soon available. In Germany, for instance, the government bought for several millions antibody, and this is put into certain hospitals, and the hospitals can decide who will get this recombinant monoclonal antibody. Sounds very good because it could probably heal immediately, but there are a lot of things. It has been demonstrated that it's only effective in patients with very mild to moderate symptoms of COVID-19, and only in the first 10 days of the infection. So if it's given after 12 days or 15 days, or if the patient is really severely ill, has shortness of breath, is in the ICU, there has been no effect demonstrated. So probably I believe this will not be the solution of the whole problem. And a similar of this antibody was given to President Trump in the United States. So he got a cocktail of everything. Probably, I believe this will not be the definite cure. The active immunization will be the thing we need. The next one. You have probably heard about this and the different strategies with the antibodies. You see the Oxford AstraZeneca antibody with different effectiveness varying from 60 to 90%, but has the great advantage that it can be stored in a regular fridge. The mRNA antibodies from Moderna and Pfizer Biotech, higher efficacy, 95%. Also 2 injections, but they need to be stored either at -20 degrees or at -70 degrees. So this is a lot of logistics, which you discussed earlier. And we have the Russian, the Gamalaya or Sputnik 5, again, viral vector, 2 injections, high efficacy, and it will be probably soon proved also in Europe. The data, and now they have clinical studies, look very well, and it again can be stored in a regular fridge. The next one. I think we can skip this I already mentioned, and I will come now to some of the important questions which we probably really can not ask now, because some of you will ask, how long will this vaccine be effective? We have the vaccine now for 6 months in clinical trials. We have the first patients immunized 1 month ago. So how can you know how long it will be effective if it's not even effective in most of the patients? So this will probably take some time to get this data. How will it affect IBD disease activity? We make estimations and we believe that it will not, but in all these clinical trials, IBD patients were not allowed, so we don't know it in studies, as we would do any studies with any other medications. What will happen to the other medications in response, we don't know. Same issue, because patients have not been entered into these clinical trials. The antibody needs it to be monitored. I will say something at the end. And should asymptomatic or post-symptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infected patients with IBD get COVID-19 be vaccinated? I will also say a little bit at the end and also about the timing. So next one. This is one approach how physicians try to get information if a vaccine will work. So if we don't know anything about SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, we look how previous vaccinations in IBD patients were effective. And on the left panel, you see how the pneumococcus, so the pneumonia vaccine will be effective. And you can see if you have a patient with IBD treated with 5-AZA, it will be effective in 90%. If you have a patient on azathioprine, it's a little bit less, but still 80%. Patients with anti-TNF, it's lower, but still quite effective. And if you have a combination of anti-TNF immunomodulator, it's about the same range. You see, for pneumonia vaccination, it's 90% efficacy. If you look to the regular influenza vaccine, and this is one H1N1 several years ago, you see that even in control patients, you get only in 60% a significant immune response. And you can see that it's a little bit lower, but still very significant in patients treated with immunomodulators, anti-TNF, or combination. And there are several other trials on the very right panel where you can see that, for instance, in HPV, there is some reduction. If you have a hepatitis A vaccination, there is no reduction. Some of the influenza virus will not be affected at all. So sometimes you really have just to make a study, or you have to test it in practice. The next one. So when you don't have the data, you look at all other available data, and experts will meet and will make a process of looking in references in the literature. They will make estimations. And one of these important estimations and one of these most important recommendations in the previous weeks is probably coming from the IOIBD. This is the International Organization of Inflammatory Bowel Disease, with 60 world-leading experts from all over the world, and they had a conference just shortly before Christmas online, and several discussions before, and they were trying to answer all the questions with the best of the knowledge we have available. So there was one aspect about timing of when to receive the COVID vaccination. And this is probably what most of you expected. The best time is the earliest opportunity to do so. So if there is 10 is the highest agreement, if you see it's all above 8. So it's a very, very strong agreement, and 95% or always more than 90% of the patients were in agreement. So timing, it should be very, very early. Disease activity should not make any changes. So a patient with active disease, a patient with quiescent disease can be vaccinated. We believe that the vaccination is unlikely to cause a flare, just in comparing to other vaccinations. And it should be also administered in patients during induction with biologic therapies, irrespective of the timing of the treatment cycle. So when you have the chance to get the vaccination, you really should do it. I think these are the key messages of this slide. The next one is very busy, so we can move one. And you will see all the slides, so I will not discuss it in full details. But this is the important issue about prioritization. So who should be the first? This is sometimes very difficult, but as I pointed out, if possible, everybody should be vaccinated. Then there was a question: should the physicians seeing IBD patients, for instance, should be vaccinated? And you can see all this in detail, and we can probably answer some of the questions a little bit later on. I have only 2 more slides. And the next one, this is about IBD medications, and if you should do anything about the medication. I also will not discuss it in full detail. To summarize, the whole story is, it doesn't matter what type of medication you take. It should not be stopped. Your vaccination should not be deferred. And you see, it's almost always above 8 for all these decisions, and a very high proportion of agreement of these world-leading experts. And the final one, what about the efficacy? And this is what I told you before. Nobody knows the efficacy in IBD patients, as it has not been tested, but compared to other vaccinations, we believe that there will be a significant response. We believe that antibody titers can be measured, and in those patients who have not a great response, a 3rd or 4th vaccination could be given, similar as in patients who get hepatitis B or hepatitis A vaccinations. So my very final slide is just to show you the key messages. I believe, and most of the experts in the world believe, that vaccination is strongly recommended for patients with IBD. The risks of the vaccination, according to all the data we have, are anticipated to be very, very low. Patients taking immunosuppressive drugs, including biologics, small molecule inhibitors, can be vaccinated, and there is no risk to be suspected. All currently available vaccines are recommended for IBD patients, so there is no advantage for one or the other. repeated vaccinations, as I pointed out, may be needed in patients with an insufficient immune response. And as you already heard before, all the recommendations offered by healthcare authorities and specialists should be consistent and unbiased, so that patients are not really twinkled in a world with different recommendations and they don't know what to do. So with this, I'm very happy to entertain any questions, and you can show my very final slide. You can see I survived the vaccination, which I got already 6 weeks ago. So I already had my my second vaccination 2 weeks ago, and I had no side effects at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dignus. And I think a lot of questions there. And I suppose I'll just bring back on Maria Stellas and Dr. Shula as well, if possible, to come back onto the screen there and have a kind of a group discussion or a group question and answers. One thing that I know, Professor Dignus, you've had your vaccination, and Dr. Shula, you brought it up as well. How does the lack of clinical trials in relation to patients with IBD, is that putting people off getting the vaccination, do you think? Which then is allowing, Dr. Shula, you mentioned social media and hesitancy in getting vaccines. Do you think they're all combined by the fact that there isn't the clinical trials of patients with IBD? Are they all feeding into one another?
Yes and no. I am convinced that this general hesitancy we are seeing is part of a very different and larger problem, and social media is a really tricky surface, I would say, because many authors of comments and Facebook posts or other social media posts might have a false assumption that they are very well informed in terms of how vaccines do work or how clinical trials work. And we really are seeing a million vaccine experts or billions of vaccine experts out there these days. But I very much agree with what Professor Dignus mentioned, that evidence-based approach is currently the best we have. And where we lack certain data, that type of data luckily can be extrapolated from other vaccination programs and other earlier vaccines that are already out there, also for the IBD patient. So I'm quite confident that with the statistics and all the emerging data backing us up, we can be very confident in producing those consensus papers that we have just seen.
Professor Dignus, how do you get that across to patients? Because I think over the last number of years, patient safety and patients have educated themselves a lot more on vaccines, medication. How do you get it across to patients that the vaccines are safe?
I think this is not too difficult. Just now we have huge clinical trials, and usually looking at the regular IBD trials, there are 1,500 or 200 patients. In these trials are 40,000 patients, 35,000 patients, so huge patient numbers. And if you see, the efficacy is 90 to 95%. We have no IBD drug where we can achieve anything like this. And if you see at the side effects, and compare the side effects with placebo, and placebo was just water, saline solution, and you see there is no real significant difference for the very difficult things. This helps most of the patients. So we have to tell that there are some side effects, but if you have chills, if you have a fever for 1 or 2 days, if you feel tired for 1 or 2 days, this is seen in only 1/3 to a half of the patient, and the other half has nothing whatsoever. And all the patients and all my colleagues I saw so far managed within, let's say, 12 to 48 hours. So there was nothing, no reminder. And just remember your regular drugs. When you take an anti-TNF, if you take your adalimumab or something, you get some side effects. I think this is really, really, really worth it. And what was also helping, for instance, as just mentioned, even hospital people do not want to get vaccinated. So when we offered the vaccination for those working with the COVID patients, all the doctors wanted to be vaccinated, the nurses only about 60%. And then one of the nurses, a very young one, got a severe COVID infection. And everybody wanted to get the vaccination. So some people believe you will not get sick and it's only a flu. But if you have young people without any disease and see that they really get sick, this is probably convincing also some people.
True. One of the challenges, and I think Maria Stella, your presentation alerted us all even more so to it, is the different approaches in the different countries. How big of a challenge is that for you in both the EAHP and obviously Professor Dignes as a gastroenterologist? How is this challenge with that each country is taking a different approach?
We didn't really discover that. We really didn't address this kind of questions, but in generally at that time we didn't ask them to ask it to our FK members. So we just advised them, of course, to address their questions to the FK National Association, to the treating doctor, that should be a family doctor or a gastroenterologist as well, of course.
But is that a problem between yourselves, Dr. Schule and Professor Dignes, in that some countries are saying you need to speak to your gastroenterologist, some countries you need to speak to your GP? Is that going to be a challenge as the vaccination program rolls out?
Well, from our experience, and that is strictly speaking of the European area of the geographic lineup, we see that most of the differences are more technical type of ones, and the fundamentals and how the structure of vaccine delivery is actually constructed is not that different. So the fundamentals are very solid and they are very similar. It's more the technicalities, who you should talk to first. Will it be a vaccination center? Will it be a hospital or a GP practice or a pharmacy where you get the vaccination? I would consider that technicality. I would think that the wider interface you have with the broad population is the better, so that you could deliver vaccinations more rapidly to a much higher number of people, so that we can achieve that so-called herd immunity faster. But other than that, the fundamentals are the same.
I would definitely agree, and I don't see much of a difference. It probably depends on the logistics in each of the different countries. For instance, I was very happy to see that pharmacists will do it in some countries, or pharmacists in Germany. This would be completely impossible, could not be done. But in Germany, what I found now quite good is for the very senior people. There were teams going into the nursing homes to do the vaccination, so nobody had to travel to any place. And we have large vaccination centers, but no supply, so they are completely empty. So we are still, everybody probably is struggling to have the best way how to invite the people, how to get everybody, because the older people are not familiar with the internet and they don't get their appointments. So I think we can learn from each other and see who is doing the best way.
So I have some questions in from our members. What happens if the time between the first and second dose exceeds the expected? I suppose this comes down to medical shortages as well. Is what happens if you're meant to take the second vaccine after 21 days and it can't be administered because there's a lack of vaccine available?
It's a very good question, and probably it doesn't matter that much. Again, we can only tell you we don't know because we haven't studied, but you know that there is a shortage, and certain countries already decided that they will prolong the intervals and hope that one vaccination may be somehow sufficient, and there will be new vaccines with only one injection anyway. So I think this would not be that harmful, but if you want to be really on the safe side and would be having high antibody titers, then it would be recommended to do it in the appropriate way as it has been studied.
And do you think, and you both mentioned it there in one of your answers, do you think herd immunity can be reached? And is it possible?
I believe definitely yes. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to have it. I think we all have to be aware that it will not be this June, as everybody was hoping, to get a real herd immunity. I believe it will take until next year. And as we are traveling all over the world, so even if we have a herd immunity in Europe, Africa, and to the States and to India, so it will take probably really long.
Yeah. And is there a time interval before and after vaccination when it is the most appropriate? And I've looked into this myself personally, but is there an ideal optimum time to take your biological drugs in between that period? And I know your slide, Professor Dignes, kind of alluded to it's just continue with your medication, or is that down to each doctor that will kind of advise on that?
I think we discussed it really extensively, and this is just how we extrapolate from other vaccinations. And as this is not a live vaccine, it's a dead vaccine, so there is no risk of the patient whatsoever. And in theory, if you have a completely normal immune system, you would get a higher titer. So if you're a little bit away from a medication, it may be a little bit more beneficial, but nobody really knows it. And what we agreed upon is that it would be much more recommended to have a third or a fourth vaccination in those people who will get insufficient titer. And as soon as we have enough vaccines, this will be no problem. Because we even don't know how long it will last. So it may be that after 2 years, people will need another vaccination again. So nobody knows it.
And Dr. Shula, are you coming across concerns in relation to pharmacies about the different variants? Because I suppose as COVID is rapidly changing, and are the vaccinations and the new variants actually matching?
Well, I have to say that, well, of course, with the caveat, Professor Dignes also mentioned that we really have no statistically significant data on that because those new variants are only just emerging. But from the theoretical point of view, I would like to highlight that actually these vaccines are rather clever constructions. And when they approached to create a vaccine, they took the so-called very conservative part of the virus, which is largely uniform across the board. So should there be any slight differences in the structure of the vaccine, the so-called spike protein is very similar between the subtypes of the COVID mutations as well. And so far, most of the vaccines we are having experiences with create those spike proteins in the body through different means, just like you saw previously. But apart from the attenuated virus type vaccines, we are hoping for a very similar response rate and basically protection rate throughout the board.
Okay. Are we keeping from either party? Are we keeping, I suppose, a register on how many people with IBD have been vaccinated, or do we know already how many people with IBD have been vaccinated?
I think this is very difficult to answer. I believe there will be not too many, only the older ones. And I see just one question in the chat. How about some results from Israel? They have a higher number, but they started 4 weeks ago. So they haven't even gotten their second injection. And you will see the titer 2 weeks later, and I'm not sure if we will test it in every patient, just thinking about the logistics. So we will not know within the next 3 months or so.
I think this is one of these EFCA patient talks where you nearly need a part 2 in about maybe 6 weeks, where we have more information, because we're at such an early stage of the vaccine as well, and that you kind of need to, it's evolving constantly all the time. I suppose, and I don't want to keep either of you too much, I suppose my one final question, if there's one there, where do you see the challenges, Professor Dignes, and maybe Dr. Sula, you can answer as well, over the next, ordinarily you look at the next 6 months, which I think with SARS-CoV-2 is just too complicated, but where are the challenges over the next 3 months in relation to COVID and vaccinations?
I believe the most important thing is that we still should adhere to all the social distancing and all the other issues, because we have still some answers that we do not, that we are still awaiting. We know that people who are vaccinated will be protected, but we don't know if they can transfer the virus to other people. So this is something which is still unclear. And I think the emotional discussion, if people who got the vaccination should be preferred and should be able to travel and to go to certain countries, this is something which we really have to be aware and have to take care about, because if only 5% or 10% or 15% of a country is vaccinated, all the others should not lack and should not be prevented from doing other things. So I think this is for me the most important thing. I'm not afraid that much because we are in a much better shape than a year ago. We have protective measures, we have masks and everything. So a year ago we had nothing. And we are moving again to spring and summer. This will help social distancing and being outside. And by then, hopefully we have enough vaccination that we really can vaccinate by the end of the summer all the people who wanted to be vaccinated. And if this would work, then we would have herd immunity, at least in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Dr. Schuler, what do you think are the challenges for the next 3 months?
Well, I totally agree about the social or the challenges for the society. Also, there are some major ones for the economy as well, which is really an off-topic discussion for today. From the pharmacist point of view and from the supply chain point of view, currently we are seeing that the transport issue is mostly fixed. So it looks okay. We see no problems there. Where we see challenges right now are the ends of that supply chain, being production and being delivery of the vaccine to the people. And from that perspective, I would say that on the long run, production will be ramped up. And I really am not pessimistic about that. Delivery will still be an issue, and that is where perhaps we still have some thinking to do, because we have seen that some of these vaccinations or some of these products do need some special environment to be stored in, or a special knowledge to be diluted and delivered to the patient. So perhaps where we have some challenges is the way that we could expand the throughput of vaccination centers, and perhaps that would need the inclusion of additional healthcare professionals. And I would be very happy to see that pharmacies throughout Europe would be involved in this program.
I did know this was going to be a hot topic, so could I be cheeky enough and ask for 2 more questions?
Sure.
Because we're live, it's very hard to say no to me. And I promise I won't go more than 2. So if everybody could bear with us. And look, if we do have more questions coming in, I think we're still at 100 people watching. So if there is more questions, maybe hopefully we can get them answered offline then, and we can share with our members. And I think this comes down to any vaccination, not just in relation to COVID. Should you be more worried if you have regular side effects, being fever, fatigue? Does that mean your immune system is reacting, or is it better if you don't have any side effects at all?
I think this is a very important question, and probably the summary of the story is that only patients who are really hyperallergic. So this was what some people really made a little bit frightened. The 2 patients or 3 patients in Britain who got a severe reaction, but this is really, really rare, and these were patients who were so allergic to everything what is available, and for these patients you probably need to take special care. And this is why the initial vaccinations were made in centers, in hospitals, and the patients had to sit there for 20-30 minutes to see what will happen to them. And so in our hospital, we did so far 700 vaccinations, and we had none of these effects. And these were older and younger people and people with allergies and with rheumatoid arthritis. And we also have vaccinated nurses with IBD. So nothing happened. And especially the nurses with IBD were very afraid because in the past they had an allergic reaction to something and nothing happened. So with our modern medicine, we are able to manage this, and this is a real rare event. But you will always hear these type of stories. So there was in one German nursery home, a 99-year-old was vaccinated and died 3 days later. So the first news is a 99-year-old died after vaccination. And some people say, oh, he should not even have been vaccinated because he was already very, very, very sick. So this is... we always have to be honest when we talk about these data and these stories, and you can always make it in the right direction you would like to have.
Okay. Is there a perfect time to do antibody testing, do you think, or are we at that stage yet?
I believe not, because the research centers will do it because in the hospital or in a center like ours, we are interested what's going to happen. So we will do it, and all these centers will do it. So we will know it pretty soon. But I'm not sure if it should be done now in every patient who is so we were not doing it in all the normal patients, even if they had a COVID-like disease and no infection. There was general recommendation not to do it because we didn't know what to do with these titers. Now we know a little bit more, and I think this will be recommended a little bit later this year.
And sorry, and this is my final question. Is there any data about the COVID vaccine in response to patients with TNF blockers? And I know Professor Axel kind of referred to this from Israel, but is there any data in relation to the vaccine and TNF blockers?
No, not with the vaccine, because people taking higher doses of steroids, taking TNF blockers were all excluded in these trials. Yeah. We have only the data of patients who have been vaccinated starting in December, and this is what we know at the moment, and we will get let's say reliable real-world data, and real-world data are really important, and EFCA doing these type of questionnaires is also very important than in doing it, and I would recommend that you think about such a study. We will probably have these data in half a year or so.
Okay. And is that a concern for you, that we're going to have to wait, because especially if you think of our members and their patients, that patients are going to have to wait that long? I know there is no choice, I do understand that, but is that a concern, or does that lead back to concern? Yeah.
For me, it's no concern at all because of our experience with other vaccinations, and especially for patients on anti-TNF. All patients who have anti-TNFs, they know there is a strict recommendation to get vaccinations before or even in a, let's say, more quiescent stage of disease, and we do hepatitis B and zoster and all these vaccinations. We are only afraid in doing live vaccinations, and the only one which is probably relevant is yellow fever. And as nobody can travel at the moment in yellow fever countries, this is a so safe vaccination. I'm not worried at all, and I think everybody who got a vaccination before should not be worried. And we had especially recommendations from all societies before we had COVID vaccinations that vaccinations against the flu should be performed, against pneumococcus should be performed, because these would be risk factors. If you get COVID disease and acquire these diseases as well, this would be very stressful for the patients. So, summary, not worried at all. And I ask patients also to be not worried at all. They really should trust their physicians.
And it is, Dan. Dr. Shula and Professor Dignes, I know we could sit here all night, and I know the questions would continue to come in. And look, maybe that is something that we can maybe in another few months meet up again to see where we're at for our original conversation. And Maria Stella, I'm sure with EFCA, we will be doing more studies, and maybe a part 2 will be required on as this, I suppose, global pandemic settles, hopefully.
We will take your suggestion as well, Professor Dignes. So we will do a study from it. We will take your suggestion. Yes, thank you very much. This is what we really wanted to hear about. That so the COVID-19 vaccination is totally secure for the IBD patients, and it's a really good news. Thank you very much.
So from everybody on the EFCA board, everybody watching, Professor Dignes and Dr. Shula, we thank you so much for your time. And to everybody watching, please, if you have any questions, please speak to your doctor, please speak to the National Association, or contact us directly if there's anything we can do. And hopefully we look forward to seeing you at the next EFCA patient talks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.